All right. Yves, how did you do with your name? Did you get it right?
He was close.
All right,
he
cool.
added the S, but I'm good with that.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We're almost halfway through the afternoon. How's the energy level? How's everyone feeling? Guys, come on. You know I'm going to ask for more than that. How are we feeling with the energy level? Thank you for humoring me. All right, guys, we're going to be talking about the next evolution in banking here, and we've got a lot of ground to cover in a relatively short period of time. So I want to kick it over to you first, Yves. Can you just give a quick introduction for the audience?
So my name is Yves Larose. I'm the CEO and founder of the EOS Network Foundation, as well as XSAT, a Bitcoin scaling solution. I've been in the crypto space since 2010, started mining Bitcoin on my laptop when you could still do that. Fast forward 2015, here I am on stage with the great Mike.
Oh, thank you very much. Wow, I'm going to use that as a moniker, the great Mike. No one ever calls me that. So for those of you who are doing the math in the audience, you've been in this space for 15 years. You've seen an enormous amount happen over the course of the last 15 years. And I'd actually like to, we're eventually going to start to a big announcement that's coming out of EOS. But you know, one of the themes that I wanted people to pay attention to and dig a little bit more into over the course of this conference is how are investors thinking about the space, specifically different L1s, and how has what has worked with L1s changed over the course of the last 15 years? So can I ask you to put on your history cap here? Because you have a very interesting background being very technical, but also having the perspective of an economist. How has the environment for smart contract platforms changed over the course of the last 15 years? What happened and what made L1s work during the kind of ICO meta of 2017? And how does that look different today?
Yeah, 15 years has gone by pretty quickly. There was no gray when this started. You mentioned, for example, smart contract platforms 15 years ago. That was not a thing, right? When Bitcoin came out, really the only use case that you had with Bitcoin, and I would argue that even at that time, people didn't see Bitcoin so much as a store of value. It was more so of transfer of, or just the proof of concept that you'd be able to transfer value. And so there was really no smart contract capabilities at that time. And so this idea was pretty basic at first. And to put it back in my shoes, one of the ways I was introduced to it was just the combination of being able to, with others around the world that you don't know, being able to combine compute power towards something. So if you bring it back to 2008, 2009, protein folding was a big thing. Protein folding with your computer to be able to contribute to cancer research, for example. And so Bitcoin was very similar to that in its very origin states. Fast forward 2015, Ethereum comes about. You've got smart contract capabilities. Still very limited, though, in terms of no use cases. 2017, CryptoKitties comes and takes Ethereum down. For the first time, really, you have an actual use case that's got so much demand that the product can no longer supply. The industry starts looking at this as, maybe this thing has clout. Maybe this underlying technology could be used for other use cases. We need to try to scale this because it's going to come. 2017, crazy demand. And for those of you who were there at the time and maybe were there earlier, I remember I thought, this is it. We're going to hit mainstream adoption. This is where it's at. We're going to have tons of use cases. Blockchains can finally meet the demand. You've got Gen 3 Layer 1 blockchains coming about. More use cases, more scalability. ICO summer, thousands of projects launching, and a capacity for the first time as well to be able to raise capital on a global level extremely quickly. Too quickly, most of their projects are no longer around. But it showcased this idea that you could leverage this technology on a global point of view to be able to attract participants to contribute towards something. And that there was trust end to end. And I guess then that brings us up to then 2021 and now 2025, where I see it, we're completely different from where we've been, is we now have institutions that are part of this. We now have capital that's more mature. We have players and stakeholders that are also more mature, so there are use cases that they're looking for and what they're looking to do with their capital, and even just, in a way, legitimizing blockchain and the tokens as asset classes, that has matured significantly as well. So the use cases are completely different. And the kind of people is also very, very different. So you go from a very cypherpunk kind of base to now we're seeing Wall Street and large family offices and institutions, banks, et cetera. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, and it strikes me that even going back to when I entered the industry in 2017, all of these like Goldman Sachs, I remember listed a there's like 10 things that we think are going to be built on the blockchain, and there were money market funds on the blockchain and real estate on the blockchain. And, after a couple of years, people sort of laughed at that. But maybe a lot of the new constructions that are being built today, you look at a Morpho Vault, you can kind of squint at that, and that looks a little bit money market fund-like. And maybe they were just a little bit early and they didn't get the form factor 100% exactly right. But EOS, I think one of the things that it got right very, very early on was that one big layer, which is very fast and cheap, actually makes quite a bit of sense. And so when you look at the smart contract landscape today, it's obviously much more heterogeneous, much more diverse. There are more smart contract platforms. So how do you evaluate the sort of competitive landscape of different L1s today and how that's changed over time?
So if you bring it back to, let's say, Gen 3 Layer 1 blockchains, where the idea was all about scalability, low cost, reliable, one of the things that's very different from now and what from then is everybody was really focused on TPS. Everything was about how many transactions can you handle. And I'm sure you've heard, people were comparing to what does Visa require in a particular day, and I forget what it is, like 6,000 transactions per second. Forget the number. And people were all aiming at that. That was the ceiling. If you can hit that, you can run Visa on your blockchain. And people were really focused on that part in terms of smart contracts. People weren't really focused on the usability of the products back then. So they were more, obviously, very tech-focused, very tech-heavy, but very little thought given to the actual products. And that's also something we've seen a shift in the smart contract platforms. I'd say in the last 3 years or so has been a considerable shift towards and making products very user-friendly. So for a long time, you could tell the difference between a blockchain product or a native Web 2 application. It was quite obvious. To a certain extent, it's still very much that way, but a lot of innovation has gone in that field where projects were building and trying to leverage blockchain from an end-to-end perspective in their products. So inserting blockchain everywhere. Everything needed to be built on the blockchain. The pendulum switched back to maybe certain components need to be leveraging this piece of technology for its inherent features and functions, but not all of it need to be built on blockchain. So that shift has also occurred in the last couple of years. And I think those smart contract platforms have made that shift, and now we're seeing much better products, user-facing, where you've, in a way, essentially abstracted away blockchain from it.
So maybe help us square, where you see us sitting at this moment in time and whether or not you see it as being an inflection point. Because, if we'd been hosting this conference back in 2017, we might have been talking a little bit, higher level, a little bit more about ideals, some of that libertarian value. And instead, what we're talking about today is how are we bringing, hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars on chain. And institutions have a very different set of requirements in terms of, what they need for things like KYC, AML, that type of thing. And so how do you kind of square some of the early, even design and construction of EOS, right, being a public chain, which is permissionless, with what we're going to need to onboard institutional capital moving forward?
So there's a few trends, I think, that have happened in the last year and a half or so that are quite key to where we are today and where I see the opportunities lie in the future. For one, we started seeing about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that a lot of the builders shifted away from Ethereum and a little bit away from Solana to a certain extent, back towards Bitcoin. Bitcoin, by far, largest asset class, and to a certain extent, the one that was somewhat left sitting idle for a while. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that what can you do with your Bitcoin? You can buy, you can hold, ideally you don't sell. Maybe you could earn a little bit of yield on it, but even that is quite new. So you really couldn't do anything with it. If you want to start doing things with your digital assets, Ethereum is really where it was at, or at least the Ethereum ecosystem. And about a year and a half ago or so, we started seeing a shift in the industry where a lot of people started building Bitcoin scaling solutions. In part, we built one. So we built XSAT, which currently has about $650 million worth of Bitcoin locked up in TVL. And the idea there is to be a Bitcoin transport layer. And that, I would think, is one of the pillars that I saw, is kind of key to what I'm seeing coming. The second one, with the ETFs coming about last January, that really brought about a flow of capital that was, as I mentioned earlier, mature, very different, institutionalized, focused. And so it's a different type of investor, a different type of stakeholder within the networks. And then that third piece with the new administration here in the US, we're seeing for the first time symbolisms and I guess signs of a little bit of taking the foot off of the industry and being able to let it innovate a little bit. Obviously, legislation takes time to be able to put in place, but right now, at least that symbolism that to a certain extent, America is out open for business in the crypto sense, kind of completes the two previously that I mentioned, whereby I think Web3 banking and open finance as a whole is really about to lift off. And that brings us to our rebrand.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us a little bit about this rebrand? This is the big announcement here that we've been building to. So yeah, give us the high level. What's behind this rebrand? Give us the details.
So EOS was launched 6.5 years ago, not by us. At that time, I was a validator on the network, and we helped launch the network, but I was on the community side, on the technical side of things. And EOS, without getting into too much detail, was kind of left to the side for a period of time. There was no development or very little development and no funding. EOS didn't have a foundation. EOS didn't have kind of a centralized entity that could help guide the network. And foundations as a whole in layer ones are quite standard. EOS didn't have one. So 3.5 years after launch, after seeing that things were not going to change and there was really no improvement on that front, I created the foundation. We essentially started this rebranding process. At first, we didn't own any of the IP. We didn't own any of the social media. We didn't even own the IP related to the GitHub repo. So slowly, we had to start this rebrand process. And essentially, the functions and the features that we've added over the last 3.5 years have all been in a particular direction. The investments that we've made, the portfolio companies that we've been fostering, all of the products that we've even built, everything has been in that Web3 banking space. And that last piece of the rebrand is changing the name and changing the token ticker. And so today we're announcing, and I guess I'm announcing it now, the name of EOS is going to be Vaulta. Vaulta has etymology in terms of blockchain ledger. So the obvious connection there. First thing you think of when you hear Vaulta is a vault. So you got that finance, that security. EOS has been running for 6.5 years with literally zero downtime, no hacks, and then a bunch of other reasons. But essentially, we're rebranding to be able to close that gap between who we are, where we come from, and more importantly, where we're going. And where we're going is really where we see this opportunity in that Web3 banking open finance space.
And so let's talk about that open finance space. So the new name is Vaulta. Do we have a ticker?
We do have a ticker, but we're only going to announce it early May.
All right, cool. So stay tuned for that, the alpha there, folks. But all right, so within this open banking and open finance space, I would love to get a sense from you on how you see Vaulta or just different L1s competing, basically. Like, what are the axes of differentiation that you have? There can be speed and performance, I think, is one. Maybe one is customizability. What you offer your apps. Maybe something is like in the way of compliance, go to market. What are the important axes that you want to compete on here?
So there are multiple, but I think one of the important ones is where you're regulated. So for us, the EOS Network Foundation was incorporated in Canada. The idea was always to be able to, and at the time it was very easy. A lot of companies incorporate, obviously, in Caymans, BVI, that type of thing. But we wanted to ensure that we were in a jurisdiction whereby there are frameworks, where there are guidelines. And I don't mean so much in the crypto sense, because there still really aren't any, but in the traditional sense, where you're limited in what you can do and you have regulations and you need to abide by certain standards. And so we wanted to set that up, and I think that that's going to be really key when it comes to banking sector. Canada is renowned for its banking sector. It's one of our things. It's one of the things that we do. Stable democracy, maybe a little bit less in the last couple of weeks. That's a different story, but stable democracy, strong financial products, big retail market. And so being local there was really, really important. And I think where you base your products is going to be equally important. So in that banking space, being able to offer different license or holding different license in different jurisdictions to be able to offer products, I think will be key to that. So I think to a certain extent, gone will be the days where people are based in jurisdictions that are favorable for crypto, but will limit them when it comes to being able to offer real world financial products. There's going to be some gaps that are going to be filled, but in general, if you want to operate in the US and offer products within the US, most likely you will need to have incorporation within the US and be compliant within the US. And if you're a new product on the market with no history, that's going to, in my opinion, hinder you versus somebody who's been maybe based there for 5-6 years, has a track record or even longer than that, and will be able to go to market with a product. The second one, when you talk about speed and reliability, from our point of view, speed is important, but I would say that the combination of speed and reliability in terms of price, so predictability, is even more important. If you're running a business, one of the hardest things that could be is when, sure, you have low cost, but in times of congestions, costs vary, costs go up. I think it's more important to have predictable cost than it is to have the absolute lowest cost. And so for us, we've got really, really low costs, sub penny cost for transactions, for example, but the predictability of those costs, I think, is one of our inherent features. Customizationless blockchain, but we're able to have permission gardens within. In that banking space and in that financial space, having permission gardens is going to be really important for you to be able to do AML, KYC. If you're working with large institutions and they want to offer, for example, yield on their Bitcoin and they want to create a particular walled environment to be able to do so, you're going to need to have mechanisms that allow for that. So that flexibility, that customizability, I think is that third one.
Awesome. All right, Yves, I know we got to wind down here in a couple of minutes. Can I ask you a spicy question?
Sure.
Why do you think in the future investors will hold L1 tokens? So I think something that's been different this cycle as opposed to last cycle is you haven't seen many, with the one exception being Solana, existing L1s meet new all-time highs either in dollar terms or their BTC terms. And so I think rightly investors are saying why, you've heard this sort of time and time again today on the main stage of, well, if I could just hold BTC, if I think it's going to do a 5x, why would I hold something else? So why will investors hold other L1s in general, but also potentially Vaulta?
That's a good question. Previous to blockchain, I started building computers when I was 6 years old, and in the 90s, I was building websites. And for those of you who were there at the time, especially in the investor space, companies used to be valued by how many views they had on their websites. The market eventually matured, and the amount of views that you had on your website were no longer the right way to be able to evaluate a company, and now we have PE ratios, for example. I think we're at a time in blockchain where companies are still largely valued on how many views they have on their website as a metaphor. Most of them are speculative. There's going to be a time and a place where it comes where now companies are going to be valued based on how much revenue they generate. What is the underlying value they provide? What is their utility? How can they stay alive? Right now we're looking at L1s, for example, that have large market caps, but when you look at how much value they generate, how much revenue they generate as a foundation or as a network as a whole, it's none, or it's very little. And that the market, I think, is going to start maturing. The investors are going to start maturing. The institutional players, obviously, with that maturity, are going to start looking at who actually generates revenue and who's only just counting how many views they have on their website.
So you think it's some form of yield, revenue, fees, earnings sort of statistic for L1?
Sure, yeah. I think that's going to be part of it. There's no way that we're going to keep in this kind of trend of high market caps based on really no substance, nothing. It's nice, it's new, it fosters innovation, but at some point that's going to shift.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that as well. Like, even when people love to talk about store of value, and gold and crypto treasuries are another form of value, they just do it with yield. They're basically staked dollars is another way of thinking about it as well. So, all right, Eve, I know we're in our last 60 seconds here. So I don't know if folks want to follow along with the work that you guys are doing at Vaulta, or just keep up to date, or if you could give us something interesting or new on the horizon, maybe something for folks to grab onto, close us down here.
Sure. Well, if you're holding EOS right now, at some point you're going to be able to swap that over to Vaulta. But in the meantime, we've got 2 trading competitions. So we've got one that's just launching today, I believe, with Binance, and we've got another one tomorrow with PancakeSwap. So those are interesting for those who have tokens and want to do something with them. Outside of that, we've got XSAT. If you've got some Bitcoin and you want to earn some yield on it, please head over to xsat.network. In order to reach me, Big Beard Samurai, pretty easy to remember. So on X and Telegram. And otherwise, yeah, just reach out to EOS Network Foundation.
I love the Big Beard Samurai. All right, guys, please give Eva a big round of applause. Thanks you for doing this.
Thanks, Mike.